Hidden in the shadows of history lies a doctrine that once threatened the early followers of YAHUSHA, a doctrine so sinister, so deceptive, that it earned the hatred of the king himself. This doctrine is known as the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. YAHUSHA versus the Nicolaitans, Part 2. Baal worship and the call to holiness. The rise of Baal worship and the children of Yasharal. From the depths of history, there emerges a disturbing truth, one that echoes across time and continues to shape the spiritual battles of today. The Nicolaitans, a group mentioned briefly in the New Testament, held secret ties to a practice that the Bible repeatedly condemns, the worship of Baal. But what is Baal worship? And how did this ancient idolatry infiltrate the practices of those who claim to follow Yahuwah? To understand this, we must travel back to the pages of the Old Testament, where Baal, the Canaanite deity of fertility and weather, seduced the children of Yasharal into spiritual compromise. In the book of Judges, chapter 2, verses 11 to 13, we see how the children of Yasharal turned from Yahuwah and embraced Baal worship. And the children of Yasharal did evil in the sight of Yahuwah and served Balaam, and they forsook Yahuwah and served Baal and Ashtaroth. This was not merely about idolatry. It was a complete abandonment of Yahuwah's laws and the beginning of a compromise that would ripple throughout generations. This worship involved sacrifices, often of grain, animals, and sometimes even children. It was a practice that perverted the pure worship of Yahuwah and led Yasharal into deep spiritual darkness. In the book 1 Kings chapter 18, the prophet Al-Yahu famously confronted the prophets of Baal, challenging their power and exposing their deception in a dramatic showdown on Mount Carmel. The Nicolaitans' secret compromise. Baal worship did not end with the children of Yasharal. The ruah of compromise lingered through the ages, re-emerging in the teachings of the Nicolaitans. In Revelation chapter 2, verse 6, YAHUSHA says, "But this thou hast, that thou hatest the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate." The Nicolaitans, like their spiritual ancestors, mixed the sacred with the profane. They believed that because of grace, they could indulge in worldly pleasures and practices without consequence. Their practice was a blending of the sacred and profane, reminiscent of the days when the children of Yasharal worshiped Baal under the guise of religious freedom. YAHUSHA, Ezekiel chapter 8, verses 14 to 16, provides a prophetic vision of such mixing of worship. "Then he brought me to the door of the gate of Yahuwah's house, which was toward the north. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. And behold, at the door of the temple of Yahuwah were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of Yahuwah, and their faces toward the east, and they worshipped the sun." This was spiritual adultery, Baal worship, and sexual immorality. One of the most disturbing elements of Baal worship was its association with sexual immorality. Baal was often worshipped through fertility rites, temple prostitution, and lewd rituals. In Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 25, verses 1 to 3, we read how Yasharal began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab, and as a result, they called the people unto the sacrifices of their mighty ones, and the people did eat and bow down to their mighty ones. This mixing of sexual immorality with worship was a hallmark of Baal worship, and the Nicolaitans fell into the same trap. They claimed that because they were saved by grace, they could indulge in any kind of immorality without fear of judgment. But YAHUSHA warned in Revelation chapter 2, verses 14 to 15, that he hated this compromise, and he called his people to holiness. YAHUSHA's objective was clear: to bring his people back to Yahuwah's commandments and rid them of the false practices that had infiltrated their faith. His teachings cut through the lies, exposing the Nicolaitans' sinful blending of Baal worship with supposed Christianity. Are Christians repeating past mistakes today? A long-lasting question we should ask ourselves is, are we any different today? Many modern religions such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, like the Nicolaitans, believe that grace frees them from the moral responsibility. They use grace as a license to live in transgression of the law, ignoring the call to holiness. In the words of Paul in Romans chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Yah forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? The Nicolaitans compromise with the world, much like many do today, mixing faith with materialism, unbiblical beliefs, and immorality. Revelation chapter 2 verses 14 to 15 warns the early congregations or ecclesia about these practices. But I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast the stumbling block before the children of Yisrael, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication. So hast thou also them that hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. YAHUSHA's mission was clear: to teach his people how to live in obedience to Yahuwah's commandments, free from the corruption of idol worship. He confronted the Pharisees for their hypocrisy and the Nicolaitans for their immorality, calling all to a higher standard of holiness. In YAHUNATAN, John chapter 14:15, he plainly says, if ye love me, keep my commandments. A call to return to Yahuwah's commandments. The Nicolaitans' greatest error was their belief that they could follow Yahuwah and yet embrace the world's ways. But YAHUSHA came to call his people out of such compromise. Again, the message is clear. Yahuwah's commandments are still the foundation of righteous living. As YAHUSHA taught, we are to love Yahuwah with all our hearts, souls, and minds, and love our neighbors as ourselves. But love without obedience is empty. Debaryam chapter 11 verse 1 reminds us, therefore thou shalt love Yahuwah your Eluah, and keep his charge and his statutes and his judgments and his commandments always. YAHUSHA's call to holiness. Yahuwah is calling his people back to the truth. The Nicolaitan secret worship of Baal led them to spiritual destruction. YAHUSHA's message is clear. Return to Yahuwah's commandments, forsake the ways of Baal, and live in holiness. In Revelation chapter 3 verse 19, he says, as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent. The time is now to reject the compromises of the Nicolaitans and return to the true worship of Yahuwah, grounded in his commandments and holiness. Will we follow in the footsteps of the Nicolaitans, or will we heed YAHUSHA's call to return to Yahuwah's commandments? The choice is yours. Remember, we are called to be set apart. Keep Yahuwah's commandments and walk in the light of his truth. Let us be about our Father's business. Shalom.